Good morning, everybody. Just putting everybody in. There's a lot of you this morning. It's good to see. Okay. Good morning, everybody. So welcome to the Live Longer Better, Getting Active with Hypertension this morning. We're having a few technical difficulties this morning, but I'm hoping that it's going to be okay for you all. You've still got a couple of minutes if you just want to grab a drink and get yourself comfortable. Do make yourself known, obviously, in the chat. We've got sort of a variety of people attending the webinar today, so do make yourself known. And obviously, yeah, do pop yourself and welcome yourself into the chat this morning. It'd be lovely to see who we've got on the call. Maybe we can sort of share some expertise a little bit as well this morning after the webinar. But okay. So just a little bit of housekeeping, just whilst we wait for a couple more people to join. So all participants will remain muted with their cameras off throughout the webinar. As I say, do use the chat function to introduce yourself and any networking or any comments at all throughout the webinar. Please use the Q&A feature at the top. This is for sort of the presenters, so you can use the Q&A function throughout, and we'll attempt to answer all questions live, and any others we'll try to respond to them obviously after the webinar. And just a little heads up as well, the webinar will be recorded as well and distributed to those who have registered for the event. So that will be going out afterwards for any sort of further information and details we can provide. It will also be available on our website as well, livelongerbetterinhearts.co.uk. At the very end, it'd be great if you could stay, try not to rush off at the end, because we do have a feedback survey. So if you can fill that out before you sort of head off, then that would be most appreciated. Got a couple of people saying there this morning. Hi, Darren. Nice to see you. And Wendy as well, one of our Live Longer Better champions. So I'm going to pass over to the wonderful Heather from Study Active, who is going to be telling us all things to do with hypertension and what to sort of look at, what things we need to be mindful of this morning. So Heather's obviously very knowledgeable, so please reach out and ask questions, as I say, throughout the webinar. And I will hand over to you, Heather.
All right. Hello, everybody. Hi, welcome, and thank you for joining us this morning. I think we've already kind of said that we're having a few sort of slight technical issues, so I'm just going to ask a quick question here. Are you sharing my presentation or am I sharing it?
If you could share it, that'd be great. I'll stop sharing mine for now.
Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Thank you. Fab. So if you just give me 1 moment. Hopefully that will appear any second.
I can see it, Heather.
Yep, we can see it. Fab.
Yep.
Okay, so hi, my name's Heather Walker. I am Assistant Fitness Education Manager for Study Active. For those of you who don't know, Study Active, we are one of the largest online fitness education companies in the UK. So we do a lot of like personal trainer qualifications, but we also do courses along the lines of supporting clients with long-term conditions, and I'm one of the tutors for that course. So that's why I'm here today, so that I can kind of talk to you about hypertension and exercise guidance and things that go along with that. So I know you can kind of put your questions in the chat box as we're going through. If there are any burning questions, if someone could just kind of make me aware of that, because I don't have enough screens to be able to see everything. So yeah, if Charlotte or Tanya, if one of you can just let me know if we do get any urgent questions, that'd be great.
Absolutely, no problem.
Lovely. All right, so before we start, I just need to do a quick disclaimer. So it is just for information purposes, this webinar. It's not going to qualify you to work with people who do have hypertension. It's just sort of to raise awareness and kind of give you some information. If you are working with clients with hypertension, then you would kind of need to look at getting a suitable qualification. So, for example, supporting clients with long-term conditions or exercise referral. There are probably others out there, but they're the two that my company deliver. If you do have a client or anyone who is suffering with high blood pressure, then you should be getting them to go and get it checked out by a professional. So get them to go to their GP. And any medical advice that's come from a GP or other qualified professional should always be followed. So, so today's webinar, we're going to look at getting active with hypertension. So the first thing we're going to kind of talk about is what is hypertension. We want to understand that. We're then going to look at the causes and risks of hypertension. We'll then move on to understanding what the exercise guidelines are for hypertensive clients, hypertensive people, and we're also going to discuss the exercise contraindications and restrictions. And then finally, we're going to take a look at some of the medications that can be used to treat hypertension, and then discuss how this might affect exercise. So first of all, then, what is hypertension? So hopefully we know that hypertension is high blood pressure, but just to sort of break it down, just to make sure everyone is on the same page and understands what we're talking about. Blood pressure is basically a measure of the pressure that is exerted on the walls of the arteries as the blood flows through them. So you've got all your veins and arteries in your body that transports blood around, and blood pressure is basically a measure of pressure on the arteries. Blood pressure is broken into two numbers. So you can see in this little picture on the side here, you've got your systolic blood pressure and your diastolic blood pressure. So systolic is the higher number, so the one at the top, and this is the pressure of your blood against the artery walls as the heart is beating. So as the heart is sort of pumping that blood out, what pressure is on the artery walls at that point. And then diastolic blood pressure, which is the lower number. This is the pressure of your blood against the artery walls when the heart is relaxed between beats. So you've got those two figures. So one when the heart is pumping that blood out, and then one when the heart is relaxed. And these two figures, these make up your blood pressure reading. In terms of then hypertension, if someone has sustained high blood pressure, so usually over several months, this is then classified as hypertension. So with hypertension, we've got lots of different stages. So we've got here a nice little chart that sort of explains our different stages of blood pressure. So as I said, the systolic reading is the higher number or the first number, and the diastolic is the lower. So these guidelines here that I've got, these have been taken from the British Hypertension Society, and their guidelines are based on European and World Health Organization guidelines. I know somewhere there are some charts that have slightly different numbers, but like I say, this is taken from the British Hypertension Society and the World Health Organization. So this is kind of the most accepted, I say. So optimum blood pressure, you're looking at a reading of about 120 over 80, but anything up to about 130 over 85, this would be considered normal. So anywhere in that sort of range is absolutely fine. As soon as we get to about 130 over 85, this is then referred to as pre-hypertension. So they're not classed as having high blood pressure at this stage, but they're basically getting close. So it's that pre-hypertension stage. Now at this stage, it's not necessarily something that you have to worry about too much. It's something you might want to keep an eye on to make sure it doesn't kind of increase and go up any higher. And with exercise, you would want to be avoiding anything that might cause spikes in blood pressure, just because we don't want to sort of push it up. We then move on to stage 1. So this is 140 over 90, up to 159 over 99. So this is now stage 1 high blood pressure, stage 1 hypertension. And this is if someone's got a consistent reading in this sort of category for several months, they would then be classed as having stage 1 hypertension. Stage 2, you can see, is 160 over 100 to 179 over 109. So At this stage, stage 1 and stage 2, ideally you'd be looking to have your exercise supervised by a qualified professional, and you definitely want to be kind of considering things that you should not be doing, so your exercise contraindications or your exercise restrictions, and you want to be following your kind of guidance to exercise that will hopefully help lower blood pressure. When you then come to stage 3, so this is 180 over 110 or higher, stage 3 blood pressure is a complete contraindication to exercise. So if somebody gets a blood pressure reading of that, you stop them and send them straight off to their GP, straight off to wherever. I know sometimes GPs are difficult to get hold of, so you might need to call 111 and get advice from them. But yeah, as soon as we're sort of hitting stage 3, that's when you definitely need medical consultation, and you definitely should not be exercising, even if it's just sort of like a, yesterday they're absolutely fine and today they've come in and it's reading high for some reason. Yeah, better not to risk it and just be like, okay, let's go and get this checked out. I will say, if you are taking someone's blood pressure, if you've got like a blood pressure machine, if you do get a random errant reading that's like, oh, what's that? Usually people will say sort of take a couple of readings, 2 or 3 readings, just to sort of make sure. So if you've got one random reading that's odd for some reason, check again. But yeah, certainly if you're getting this sort of stage 3 level, then 100% they need to go and see someone, because they are then at risk of all sorts of complications, heart disease, heart attacks. So there are different stages. Now you might find that when you take somebody's blood pressure, the 2 readings kind of come into different stages. So you would always take the higher stage reading. So for example, if someone's got their blood pressure reading of 120 over 95, you'd go, okay, 120, well, that's optimum, but 95, that's in that stage 1. So this would count as sort of a stage 1 blood pressure reading. So it's always whatever the higher stage is of the 2 numbers would be the one that you sort of count. With blood pressure, it is perfectly normal for your blood pressure to sort of go up and down and change throughout the day and over several days. So this is why hypertension isn't diagnosed just based on one reading. It's based over a course of several months. And we're looking at a pattern of having high blood pressure readings, not just like the odd one here and there. But yeah, if you do, like I say, someone comes in, you take their blood pressure, and it's reading high, don't just sort of assume it's fine. Just be like, okay, you've got a high reading here. Let's monitor this. Let's sort of check this again a little bit later. Check it again tomorrow. It's also important to note that unless you are a doctor, you can't diagnose someone as having hypertension. So the best way to sort of deal with that is if someone comes in and you take their blood pressure, you can say, okay, so your reading is 140 over 90. This is in the stage 1 hypertension range. So it's indicating that you've got high blood pressure reading today. And then if that kind of consists of several days, you can then say, okay, let's maybe go visit your doctor, kind of explain that you've had a few blood pressure readings coming up in the stage 1 stage, and then sort of get their advice and go from there. But definitely, unless you are a doctor yourself, you can't diagnose someone as having high blood pressure. So it's just something to be aware of there. So what are our causes of hypertension? So there's 2 sort of types of hypertension. We've got primary or essential hypertension. And this is multifactorial and doesn't really have one cause. I'll go more into detail in this in a second. And then we also have secondary hypertension. So this is secondary to another condition or another thing. So it's got a specific cause. But like I say, I will explain. So primary hypertension, so like I say, it doesn't necessarily have one specific identifiable cause. It's not, I've got this and it's caused me to have high blood pressure. It's usually a combination of many different things. So for example, I've got lots of things that can increase your risks here. So physical inactivity, so anyone that's very sedentary, their risk is increased. Being overweight or obese, excessive alcohol consumption or excessive salt consumption, Your age, so as you get older, unfortunately, this means that your risk for hypertension does increase because of the physiological and anatomical changes that happen as you age. Just means that your cardiovascular system stops being as effective, so it can increase your risk. Family history, so if lots of people in your family have hypertension, you're more likely to have it as well. Ethnic origin, so African, Caribbean and South Asian communities are at a greater risk. And then also things like low fruit and veg intake, long-term sleep deprivation and stress. So if you're suffering with stress, this can kind of increase your risk if you've got other factors going on as well. So then we have secondary hypertension. So like I say, this is secondary to an identifiable cause. So for example, if you've got another medical condition like kidney disease or diabetes or thyroid problems, this can then cause high blood pressure as well. Or it could also be a side effect of certain medications. So there's some medications that are used to treat other conditions, and the side effects of those medications are high blood pressure. So these, this would be then classed as secondary hypertension. You might find if the hypertension is caused by another medical condition, as soon as the condition is treated or it's managed, it's kind of being managed, the hypertension then the blood pressure goes back to normal. So that would be a good indicator that it's secondary hypertension and not primary, because once you've kind of controlled the cause, the blood pressure goes back to normal. So I hope that sort of makes sense there, the difference between the two. So signs and symptoms. So unfortunately with hypertension, usually there are no obvious signs or symptoms, and it's only usually discovered as part of other routine checks. So the majority of people could be walking around with high blood pressure and they wouldn't have a clue. Occasionally people might suffer with like headaches or problems with their vision, but yeah, they might not then even kind of go, oh yeah, that's because of hypertension. So yes, unfortunately, there's no obvious way of knowing that you've got hypertension unless you just have your blood pressure checked, which yeah isn't great, because as we can see here, the risk of hypertension, if it is left untreated, it can actually cause many other problems. So cardiovascular disease, it can lead to heart attacks, strokes, kidney disease, damage to blood vessels, and it can also increase your risk of some forms of dementia. So yeah, like I say, there's no signs or symptoms. So you could kind of end up just having a heart attack, and that would be the first kind of time you know that you've got hypertension. So my advice would be to kind of get your blood pressure checked on a semi-regular basis. And I will talk more about this later on. So, okay, so we've talked about what hypertension is. We've discussed kind of things that can cause it and our risks and whatnot. But now, what about if we want to get active and we want to take part in physical activity, or we've got a client or whatnot, and they're wanting to do physical activity? So what guidelines should we be following? Well, first of all, we've discussed that being inactive can increase your risk of hypertension. So being physically active will actually reduce the risk. The best type of exercise is really aerobic activity, so walking, jogging, cycling, and we're looking at doing maybe 30 to 60 minutes 3 to 5 times a week. And research suggests that this can actually help reduce your blood pressure. We're looking at working at a moderate intensity, so aerobic activity of about 40 to 70%. So nothing like super strenuous, just a nice, not easy, but slightly challenging but not too hard activity, just to kind of get the heart and the lungs working, get the blood pumping. Any sort of aerobic activity really can help reduce our blood pressure. Resistance training can be used, so that's like weight training. It can be used to help reduce resting blood pressure, but it is less effective than endurance training. But if you are going to do resistance training, use low resistance and high reps. I'll come on to kind of more about that in a minute. But yeah, so if you're going to go and lift weights as part of your exercise program, you want to be doing light weights, but lots of repetitions. That's then what we call muscular endurance training. So you will get a little bit of cardiovascular workout from that as well, which counts as aerobic activity. We can also think about including flexibility and relaxation to help reduce stress-induced high blood pressure. So if someone they suffer with stress, and that's kind of then sort of led to them having high blood pressure as well. Any sort of relaxation activity, like yoga and Pilates, I think, or any sort of flexibility training where they sort of have to stop and breathe and sort of take that time, it will help them to relax, and that can help reduce stress. Obviously, it depends on the cause of stress, but certainly just taking some time to be nice and calm can help with stress. So yeah, flexibility training would be really good to include as well. So onto exercise contraindications or exercise restrictions, so things that we should be avoiding. So I've already mentioned if you've got stage 3 hypertension, that is a definite no for exercise, and that is a go to your doctor right away. But other exercises that we should be avoiding. So very intense exercise for short periods. So this is things like sprinting, heavy weightlifting, and squash. I've never played squash, but according to guidance, squash isn't great for hypertension, so must be intense. But with weightlifting, so I said, if you're going to be doing resistance training and using weights, you want to be using light weights with lots of repetitions. If you are using very, very heavy weights and just doing like 1 or 2 repetitions, that's going to be very, very intense. And a lot of time when you're training at that sort of intensity, people will hold their breath. Similarly with sprinting, people tend to hold their breath, and this actually causes spikes in blood pressure. So definitely if you've got someone that has a high blood pressure reading, or even if they're in that pre-hypertensive stage, you want to be avoiding anything that's very, very intense in like a short period. So sprinting, weightlifting, and squash. Other things to avoid: exercises with arms overhead. So anything where the arms are up above the head. So if you're sort of pressing the weight up and down, that can cause blood pressure to spike. Isometric contraction, so static hold. So basically any sort of exercise where you're holding your body in a fixed position. So like if you're doing a plank, that's an isometric hold. That can cause little spikes in blood pressure. So again, try and avoid them with people who've got hypertension. We've also got going from lying or sitting to standing very, very quickly. So I don't know if anyone's ever stood up too fast and then gone a little bit lightheaded. That's because of something called postural hypotension. And it's just where the blood pressure sort of drops a little bit as you're going from one position to another. Similarly, it's a problem if you've got high blood pressure. If you go from a lying position or a sitting position to standing very, very quickly, the blood pressure can change and you can then go a bit lightheaded, and it can cause you to sort of faint or just stumble. You don't necessarily even have to pass out, you just might stumble a little bit. So definitely anyone with high blood pressure or low blood pressure, which I know isn't the kind of focus of today, but yeah, high or low blood pressure, anything going from lying or sitting to standing very quickly is not a good idea. So definitely if you're doing an exercise where you're lying on the floor, you want to gradually come to a sitting position and then slowly stand yourself up. You don't just want to sort of jump straight up. You want to take your time transitioning from one position to the next. And then the last kind of one I've got listed here is exercises or stretches where the head goes below the heart. And this is also true if you've got someone with low blood pressure. Anything where the head is lower than the heart. So for example, if you just stand up and then fold forwards and reach down to touch your toes, your head has gone lower than your heart. This can cause the blood to rush to your head, and it increases the blood pressure in your head, and then that can also kind of cause you to pass out, can cause issues with blood pressure spiking. So again, not a good idea to do anything where your head is below the heart. There are not many exercises, but you would probably be in like a lying position with your head lower than your heart. It's probably more if you're doing any sort of flexibility training. So like I said, if you're standing and folding forward to touch your toes, it's probably not a good idea. So just always be aware, is the head higher than the heart? And then if so, you'll be fine. But if it does drop, then think about an adaptation that you can use there. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all of these, but here are some of the different types of medications that can be used to treat hypertension. I'm just going to talk about a couple of them. So that top one, we've got thiazide type diuretics. So what these do is they cause vasodilation in the blood vessels. So it means that they basically get get bigger, so the arteries kind of open up a little bit. This causes the sodium and water to pass through that's in the blood, so blood volume reduces, and because the blood volume has reduced, that means the pressure on the arteries is lower. You've got things like beta blockers, so these block beta receptors in the heart, and they can slow down and decrease the force of the contraction of the heart. So it's reducing cardiac output. So it's reducing how much blood is being pumped out on each beat. Again, if there's less blood being pumped out, then there's less pressure on the arteries. What else have we got? We've got alpha blockers. So these block the effects of noradrenaline, which again causes vasodilation. So again, we said that with the thiazide type diuretics will increase that water and sodium passing through, so blood volume decreases. And then centrally acting drugs, I'll mention this one as well. Again, this is going to decrease cardiac output. So again, it's going to reduce blood pressure. There's lots and lots of different types there. There's just like 4, just to give you an idea of how they might work. But then, of course, we have to consider if someone is taking medication for hypertension, what side effects might these medications have on them, and then what kind of considerations are we going to have to make if they're taking part in physical activity. So we talked about beta blockers and how they'll basically slow down and decrease the force of the heart contraction. A side effect of this is it can cause bradycardia, so it basically means that the heart rate slows down. If you're using heart rate monitoring as a form of monitoring intensity of exercise, this basically is no longer going to be an effective way of doing it because their heart rate's going to be slower than you think. So, for example, you can use % maximum heart rate to monitor someone's intensity. So 100% is like the most it should ever be working at. And you could be like, right, we're going to work at 70%. When you work it out, you're like, oh, you're only working at 60%. Let's push harder. But because actually they're on beta blockers and their heart rate is lower, they might actually be working at what would be 70%. So you're then trying to push them harder, and that's then pushing them too high. So if someone's on beta blockers and they've got this like slower heart rate, using any sort of heart rate monitoring wouldn't be effective for them. Several of the medications that can be used to treat hypertension can cause hypotension. So this is then low blood pressure. With like low blood pressure, we talked about postural hypertension going from like sitting to standing. Again, this is going to be an issue here. So again, we want to be taking care to slowly move from one position to another. Again, exercises with the head lower than the heart, not good for hypertension or hypotension, so want to be avoiding those. You also want to avoid any sort of exercise where you're sort of going and going and going, and then you just sort of stop suddenly and stand still. To be honest, you probably shouldn't do that ever anyways, but it's especially important if someone's got hypotension, so low blood pressure, because it's going to increase the chances of what we call blood pooling. And this is basically where the blood sort of pools in the legs effectively, and it's not being pushed back up around to the head, which is again going to cause like dizziness and potentially fainting. So if you've got a client who's got medication with a side effect that's hypotension, make sure if you're doing any sort of aerobic training with them, you don't kind of get them to run and then just stop and stand still. You want to make sure you're doing a gradual cool down. So, okay, we're running at like an effort level of 6. Now let's come down to a 5, then we'll come down to a 4, then we'll come down to a 3. So you're gradually bringing them back down so the body's got time to kind of adapt and cope with the fact that, okay, we're going from exercise to not exercise rather than just stopping still, letting the blood pool and then passing out. And then other things to be aware of, you know, they might have medications that cause dizziness or nausea or fatigue or headaches. So at this point, you know, you're looking at reducing exercise intensity or using longer rests sort of between sets if you're doing resistance exercises. So instead of resting for just like 30 seconds, they might need like a minute or something. I would say if you do have anyone who has got hypertension and they are being treated for it, they are on medication, I would make sure you know what medication they are taking, have a look at the potential side effects. There is the British National Formulary, I think it is, where literally you can just have a look at the drug. It will tell you all the medications, all the side effects, sorry. So you can go and just familiarise yourself, just so then you can be aware if you're with this particular person and this is something, you know, they're regularly having dizziness, you can be like, oh, that's because of the medication that they take. So it makes you aware, basically. So I'd always, yeah, if someone is taking medication, just make sure you know what it is, make sure you know what potential side effects they might have to deal with. Right, I've included here a list of medications, a little link to this list of medications, so you can go kind of have a look at this link later. But this is basically some medications that will increase the risk of falls. And it could be for a number of reasons. So you've got your drug name, you've got what it's used for, and then like how it's going to affect like falls. So if we have a look at that third one down, we've got amlodipine, which is used to treat hypertension. You can see that an effect is it can actually cause low blood pressure or a drop in blood pressure on standing. And you can see kind of from the colour of that, it's a medium, it's a moderate risk. So this is another nice kind of resource that you can use. Gives you a list of all these medications. It can kind of tell you, you know, how it might affect falls, either because like it's going to cause low blood pressure, so they might go a bit like lightheaded or whatever. But yeah, this is a good resource to go and have a look at. So yeah, I could suggest maybe checking that out. So we've talked about exercise, we've talked about guidance and whatnot, but what about on a nutritional side of things? So we looked at the different causes of primary hypertension and some things that can sort of contribute to it. And there were a few, you would have noticed, a few like nutritional based things that can kind of increase your risk. So I've got some general nutritional guidance here for things that might help reduce the risk. So reducing alcohol intake. So more than 14 units a week for women or more than 21 units a week for men can increase your risk of hypertension. Now, obviously, general guidance is no one should drink more than 14 units a week. But that's just, you know, something to make people aware of if they are consuming a lot of alcohol. You know, these are the amounts that can kind of increase your risk of hypertension. Reducing caffeine. Studies are kind of a bit inconclusive as to whether caffeine affects blood pressure or not. Some say yes, some say no. But generally, as a rule, you don't want to be drinking more than 400 micrograms of caffeine a day anyway. So that's about 4 cups of coffee. Even if it doesn't necessarily link to hypertension, it will link to kind of other things. So keeping your caffeine intake at a lower level is going to help. Reducing salt. So high salt intake is going to increase your risk of hypertension. So if we are reducing our salt intake, we are reducing our risk. Guidance is no more than 6 grams per day. Reducing cholesterol. So reducing our sort of fat intake. Again, this is going to just not only help hypertension, it'll help with various other things as well. And then again, we said that not consuming enough fruit and veg can increase your risk. So if you're eating at least 5 portions of fruit and vegetable per day, then your risk of hypertension will be a little bit less. And I mean, you know, you've got to do all of these things together. You can't just be like, well, I eat 5 portions of fruit and veg a day, so that's fine. I can go and eat 20 grams of salt and drink 50 units of alcohol. No, you kind of need to do all of them together. But again, there are then those other things, other risks, but these will all help. Now, if you do have someone with hypertension and they want more complex dietary advice, then you should be seeking advice from a qualified dietitian. You can give general guidance, but yeah, if they want meal plans, if they want, you know, complex advice, then find a qualified dietitian, refer them on, and yeah, get them to help. So that's kind of everything that I have to say. I'm now going to mention this campaign by the Hertfordshire and West Essex ICB. So their campaign is basically raising awareness of the fact that hypertension and high blood pressure has no symptoms. So you might feel invincible, you might feel really strong, and really healthy, but actually you could have high blood pressure because there's no symptoms. We discussed this earlier. So what they are trying to do is they're trying to raise awareness of the fact that it's not undetectable, but it's a hidden disease sometimes. And the only way to know if your blood pressure is high or not is to go and get it checked, go and get it tested. And they are raising awareness of this and trying to make sure people know that you can get a free blood pressure check at a local pharmacy anywhere in England. I'm not 100% sure about Wales and Scotland, but I know anywhere in England you can go into a pharmacy and ask them, can I have my blood pressure checked, please? It's free, and you don't need an appointment, although if you do go to a pharmacy when they're a bit busy, they might ask you to kind of come back later when they're a bit quieter. But yeah, you can literally just sort of turn up and say, can I please have a free blood pressure check? I've included the link here to the campaign, so if you want to go and get a bit more information, you can go and kind of have a look at that and check that out. But yeah, as I've sort of said many times, high blood pressure is undetectable, not undetectable, there are no symptoms to it. So yeah, the only way to find out is if you go and get your blood pressure checked. So certainly I think campaign, they are definitely trying to target anyone who is 40 and above. But, you know, to be honest, you know, it wouldn't harm anyone to go and get your blood pressure checked. So in summary, so today we have talked about what hypertension is. So it's basically sustained high blood pressure over several months. We talked about all the different stages. So anything being 140 over 90 is classed as high blood pressure. And yeah, you'd need to sort of get several readings. It's not just like it's happened once, it's if it's consistent. We talked about some of the causes and the risks. So, you know, several causes of primary hypertension, being inactive, various poor diet choices, being overweight, and then kind of the risks if hypertension goes untreated. As I said, it can kind of lead to strokes, heart disease, heart attacks. So it is something. I think actually, I feel like hypertension is called, or heart attacks, the silent killer because there's no symptoms. So yeah, we you know want to make sure we know what the risks are. We tell people what the risks are so they know why it's important to go and get their blood pressure checked. In terms of exercise guidelines, so basically we want to be doing aerobic activity, so anything like running, cycling, dancing, at a moderate intensity, about 40 to 70% intensity, nothing too extreme. In terms of our contraindications and restrictions, if you've got stage 3 hypertension, so 180 over 110, that is an absolute contraindication. You stop and you call the doctor, call NHS 111, you go and get that looked at. Specific exercise restrictions, so we don't want to be doing heavy weightlifting, sprinting, squash, anything that's like very intense for a short period. No overhead exercises, no static holds, and again be aware of the head being below heart when we're doing any sort of like, well, any activity really at all. We then talked about some medications that are used and kind of how they might affect exercise. So basically, you know, they cause like vasodilation, they cause a reduced cardiac output. All of this will reduce blood pressure, but can then cause hypotension, so low blood pressure. So we want to kind of be aware of this and kind of what our side effects of our medication can do, and then kind of be aware, okay, we don't want to be doing any exercises where we suddenly change position. We want to make sure we're doing gradual cool downs and not just sort of stopping still. And again, avoiding the head going below the heart. So I think that is everything for me. So thank you for listening. If we do have any questions, please go for it and let me know. I think the only one I can see at the moment is, will we share the slide deck afterwards? Yes, we shall.
Yes. Thank you so much, Heather. I'll just have a little look through some of the questions, but we'll give some people some time to have a little think. But I just wanted to sort of point out, I guess, I was unaware that you could go obviously and get free blood pressure checks at the pharmacy. So what an amazing initiative that is. And I think we definitely, need to utilize that. And I think even, I guess, as sort of like a physical activity sector, any classes that are sort of being run, just trying to connect, and even just having those different stages and actually understanding what, the pre-hypertension is really important. And then obviously how those different stages progress as well. And even just having that, I don't know, as a poster in sort of like community centres, or as a bit of an awareness piece at physical activity sessions, I think would be sort of key. Or even if you're sort of, if any of you are obviously working on a more one-to-one basis with clients as well, just sort of understanding those different stages, when to sort of get checked, isn't it, as well, and just making them aware that free blood pressure check is available.
Yeah, I think that's very important, I think, to be raising awareness of, because actually I don't think I knew that you could just go into a pharmacy and ask to get your blood pressure checked. So yeah, I think definitely
Absolutely.
raising awareness of that is really important.
Yeah, and I think what you were saying, obviously, about the different, moving from different positions, again, really important. I know quite a few people who or it's encouraged, really, though. For example, if you go to an exercise class or whatever, a lot of people tend to want to start the class seated, or even the instructor will say, we're going to start the class seated, just to understand where people are at, isn't it, in terms of how they're feeling. And then when they know that it's due to come to standing, that they can sort of properly monitor that. Because I think sometimes a lot of the time people will come to class, they might feel okay, or they're not unsure, they might be feeling a little bit off, and it isn't until they start exercising they might think, well, actually, like, I'm not feeling 100%. So I think sometimes, starting a session off seated definitely has its benefits. But as you say, just being that mindful of when they eventually do get up, to kind of have extra eyes peeled. And I know sort of in classes in the past, they get told to kind of like pedal their feet before they get up to stand, to just kind of help that pooling in the legs.
Start circulation going.
Absolutely. So like little things like that can help. But as you say, just being aware of those stages and just making sure people can attend, and just make sure they're regularly checking their blood pressure is ideal, isn't it? I mean, I'm not sure how much blood pressure machines cost these days, but
I mean, I think I got mine for like not even like 20 pounds off Amazon, so you can get like a little home one.
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess if anybody's worried about it, it's definitely worth just having one, just at home, or just with you, isn't it? To kind of keep an eye on things like that. I was going to ask, is things like can hydration levels impact hypertension as well? Sort of like if you're dehydrated or anything like that?
No, I'm not 100% sure on that one. That's not something that I've discovered in any of my research that I've done. But I mean, I feel like hydration, being dehydrated, is never a good thing anyways. And certainly anytime you're doing any sort of exercise class, if you're leading a class or leading a session with anyone, or even just doing exercise yourself, it's really important to make sure that you do have water with you and you are like taking that fluid in. I feel like it's something like a litre per hour of exercise, or half a litre, I think, per hour of exercise. You should be consuming water. So even if it doesn't necessarily make hypertension worse, it can cause many other problems if you are dehydrated. So certainly always just make sure people are regularly taking in water and fluid when you're exercising.
Absolutely. Yeah. So in terms of, I've just popped up on here our post-webinar feedback form. So for those of you joining us today, please just take a little moment to fill out that form. It's most appreciated, and just share any sort of, we've got a link as well in the chat for those to fill out as well. It just helps us to kind of think a little bit about sort of what else you're looking for in terms of future webinars and that sort of thing. But equally, we can sort of, if you wanted to, you can watch previous webinars on there. We've had sort of a recent one about getting active with osteoporosis and strategies to motivate sort of inactive older adults. A bit like Heather was saying, obviously inactivity levels is a huge part potentially to linking in with the hypertension. And I'm just going to put a little link as well into the chat to do with you mentioned stress as well, Heather, being sort of quite linked obviously to that, and also long-term sleep deprivation. So as we know, generally physical activity can help, I suppose, with sleep deprivation, in terms of, feeling a little bit more tired, so you're able to sleep. But stress being obviously a key indication to potential hypertension. So I'll put a little link into the chat of just some things that we've collated that might help with sort of stress levels, like meditation, breathing, and what's kind of out there to support people's mental health as well. So just having a little look to see if there's sort of any other questions here in the chat. So raise awareness of offline walk and pharmacy services. Could be dated. Yeah, I was just having a little read. I think people are sort of making some comments there. Pauline's made some interesting comments in the chat there. But in terms of other questions, just checking the Q&A just in case. We've got too many more here as well. But again, if we've, if any of you got any questions, then we can obviously forward those on to us after the webinar today as well, in an email. That's fine. We can obviously contact Heather, and Heather can obviously answer questions as well further from there. Thank you, Liz. Liz has been very interesting. So yeah, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? It's also, looking at how we can support our own health, but also, those that are working sort of with others, and how we can sort of support them and direct them as well. So it's been really interesting, Heather. So thank you so much for your time.
No, thank you everyone for joining. I'm glad it's been interesting. So yeah,
absolutely. And just a few things to think about, that sort of that falls, HCPA stop falls, so helpful, isn't it? Just having a visual representation of all the different medications and how that might impact people as well in terms of the effects on falls. So I think, if anyone has a key takeaway definitely as well from today, print that off, have it with you, let people know of that resource as well. Because as we know, sort of polypharmacy is a huge concern when it comes to falls as well. So being on more than 4 medications. So I know it's obviously hard to necessarily get maybe a meeting with your GP lately, but worth definitely having those regular sort of medication updates, isn't it? Just to double check everything is working as it should be.
Definitely.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Heather, and thank you for everyone for joining us. And as I say, the recording will be made available as well, and we'll be sending out the slide deck in a follow-up email to you all as well. So you'll be able to catch up or watch back the webinar should you ever want to at any point in the future.
Definitely.
Brilliant. Well, I don't think, as I say, there's any further questions, but thank you again, Heather.
All right. No, thanks very much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good day, everyone.